Shavua Tov to you all. Thank you, Malcolm and Tilda, for leading the Havdalah. And as we do every Motzei Shabbat, I'd like to share with you a story. The story I'm going to share with you today is a very personal story. And if it takes a little bit longer than the other stories, you'll forgive me. It's as somebody wished me a happy birthday. It's a big one, actually. And so I want to take this opportunity to share a very special story to me that inspired me, and I hope it can inspire you. So the story begins on Shavuot of 1989. Hi, Chana. Okay, Chana's going to join us. So Shavuot 1989, the Rebbe launched what he called a new campaign. And he said, in addition to the campaigns of trying to encourage people to perform mitzvot, like putting on tefillin, like having an additional mezuzah affixed to the doorpost, that every Jewish home should have holy books in it, the notion that we should try to influence as many people as possible to give tzedakah on a daily basis, having a tzedakah box in the house, the idea that the kitchen, a kosher kitchen, a Jewish kitchen should be kosher. And of course, it's not only about the kitchen, but it's about eating kosher. And all of these mitzvahs, the Rebbe added a very interesting thing. In addition to one of the mitzvah campaigns was trying to get people to study Torah on a daily basis. The Rebbe said that he expected everybody not only to study Torah, but also to teach Torah. That everybody has to teach Torah, has to make a Torah class. Now, I can tell you that if this was in today's day and age, I would have to figure out which Torah class I should add. But at the time, I was just a boy. I wasn't even at 19 years old, and the notion, maybe it was 1990, maybe I was 19. Anyway, I had never taught a Torah class in my life, except for in the summer. I was in Camp Gan Israel in the Laurentian Mountains in Quebec, and there I had learning classes, but I had never taught a Torah class per se, and I didn't know how to do that. And the Rebbe says that everybody's got to teach a Torah class. So I distinctly remember going to the offices in Manhattan that I would visit every Friday, and I actually convinced two of the offices that I would visit to put on film that they should sit together with me in the boardroom, and that we should study Torah. And I gave a little class in the Sefer HaChinuch, in the book of Torah education. I would take a mitzvah of the weekly Torah portion, and I bought the Sefer HaChinuch in English, which actually I dedicated. It's in our library now. That's what I bought them. And I'd make photocopies. I get photocopies made each week, and I'd read along, and that's how I would teach. Several months into this is about September now, a colleague of mine, who today is a Rosh Hashiva in Israel, comes over to me. He's an Israeli boy, and he said to me, "Would you be prepared to teach a class to a group of people living in Manhattan Beach?" I'm like, I don't even know where Manhattan Beach is. He says it's apparently somewhere in Brooklyn. I said, how'd you get to me? Like, why me? He says, well, I have a friend who's also from Israel, and he only speaks Hebrew, and he's been going to the furthest reach of Mitzrayim. It takes him almost 3 hours to get there. He'd go for 3 hours on a train, put on film with two people at a company called Edelstein Roofing, and then he traveled all the way back. And he said since the Rebbe began to talk about the notion of teaching a class, he's been talking to this guy, Mark Edelstein, and trying to get him to commit to a Torah study class. So last week, the guy finally said yes. I know who this original guy is. He didn't really speak much English. He literally would put on film of me Jew, you Jew, let's put on film. Something like Torah class, let's learn. So finally the guy says, fine. Here's my address. I'm going to get a group of people together on, I think it was a Thursday night. And he says, you send me a teacher. So this fellow speaks to my classmate, and he says to me, do you know anybody who would want to give a class? And I have no idea why, of the whole class of 60 or 70 students, he asked me, but I said, okay, fine. As long as the yeshiva permits me, I'll do it. And I remember getting into a taxi. This is long before the days of cell phones or Google or Waze. And I get into the car with this Caribbean driver, and I give him an address. And he didn't know where he was going. And he took me on a wild goose chase, and an hour and 15 minutes later, I was supposed to have shown up there at 8:30. I got into the taxi at 10 after 8. We came there well after 9:30, maybe a quarter to 10. He finally found the place. And I remember walking into this home, and I said, "Hi, is there a Torah class?" And they go, "Now you come." I'm like, "Listen, I'm really sorry. I did get into the taxi on time. He didn't know, he couldn't find this place. It's like a little tiny portion of Flatbush." So anyway, we sat down, and I spent till about midnight with this group of maybe 4 or 5 couples. And I remember talking to them about what is a neshama. That was that first class. And at the end, they said, "How was I come back next week?" And I said, "Okay, I suppose I can do that." And I said, "I got to get home now, but I'm afraid to get back into a taxi because it took me an hour and a half to get here." So one of the participants in the class was a fellow named Morris. He said, "I'll give you a ride home." And he did. And I came back the next week. And then I came back a third week. And it was going to be Rosh Hashanah, so I gave a class about Rosh Hashanah then. I remember teaching them part of Psalm 47 and explaining about the shofar blowing. And this fellow Morris was taking me back each time. He opened up to me and he told me a very interesting story. He said that I was born in Poland after the war. He said my parents were in a concentration camp and they never left Poland. They survived the camp. They came back. I don't remember the name of the city. And they stayed in Poland. And he said they never told me I was Jewish. Now, this fellow was different than everybody else in the group because everybody else in the group was Sephardic. His wife was Sephardic, but he was definitely an Ashkenazi guy. And he almost didn't fit into the rest of the group. And he said to me that when I was 9 years old in the schoolyard, a group of Polish kids suddenly jumped on me and they threw me to the ground and they began to kick me and spit at me and they called me Zhidi. And I'm like, "I'm not a Zhidi. I don't know what a Zhidi is." And they said, "You are a Zhidi." And they pummeled me and kicked me and punched me. And he said, I came home that evening, that afternoon from school, bruised and battered and traumatized. And my parents were shocked and they said, "What happened to you?" And I said, "I don't know. I was beat up in the schoolyard and they said I'm a Zhidi." He said that night my parents decided they were going to leave Poland. We couldn't stay in Poland anymore. I don't know how they managed to get out of communist Poland, but they did. And he said when I was 9 years old, we made Aliyah to Israel. At the age of 9, he said, I had a Brit Milah. I was given a Jewish name, the name Moshe. And my parents weren't really observant, he says. There was very little observance in my house. I just knew that I was Jewish now. And we're living in Israel, in the Jewish country. He said I was like a secular Israeli kid. When I was 19, I went to the army. He said I finished my service. I got out of the army at 21. I got married. First girl I fell in love with. It didn't work. He says a year later I got divorced. Maybe a year and a half later. I'm 23 years old now, he says. I'm out of the army and divorced. And I decided that I'm going to leave Israel and I'm going to go try to seek my fortune. So he said I decided I'm going to go to the United States. He said I came to the United States of America with $5 in my pocket. I had nothing. I had no plan. I knew I was despondent. I was depressed. I wasn't happy about how things had gone with my life, and I wanted a new start. And he said to me, I can't even tell you how this happened, he says, but slowly things began to fall into place. He said, I have a business now. I have a wife. I have 2 children. And he said, a few weeks before I met you, I was thinking that I really need to say thank you to God. But I thought, I don't know how to say thank you. How do you say thank you to God? God has given me so much. I decided, I knew about kashrut. He said, I didn't have a kosher home. I knew about kashrut. He said, so I had this conversation with my wife, and we said, you know what, we should have a kosher home. We should have a kosher home. And he said, I koshered my kitchen. We koshered our kitchen. We got somebody to kosher the kitchen. And we decided that from now on we'd keep kosher. And he said, in the back of my mind, I knew that I wanted to progress. I knew I wanted to say thank you to Hashem and do something else. And he said, and then a few weeks ago you showed up. And he said, he was telling me he's really inspired. So we decided, we made up to meet on Sunday. And on that Sunday, this was on a Thursday evening, on that Sunday, we did Tashlich. Maybe it wasn't Sunday. It was after Rosh Hashanah. I remember it was a day or two after Rosh Hashanah. He says, we went to Tashlich, and I recited the Tashlich prayer. And in his mind at the time, he said, I threw my old life away. I threw everything into the water. And he said to me, now, so what should I do? So I said, let's go buy you a pair of tefillin, which we promptly did. We were at the Tashlach just next to 770, and we went into the closest Hebrew bookstore, and we bought Maris Schumacher a pair of tefillin. So Maris Schumacher now had a kosher home, and he was putting on tefillin, and he was coming to a Torah class on a weekly basis. A real metamorphosis. He was a very deep guy. Like he wouldn't accept things that I said easily, and he would argue with me about it. And it was a deep person, a very deep person. Several weeks after this, I had the privilege of being selected with a group of other students to be sent off on a shlichut to the yeshiva in Los Angeles. And so I had various people that filled in for me after. Whenever I would come home from Los Angeles, I would meet with this group of people, and we would have a little reunion and have a Torah class again. And I stayed in touch with many of them, especially with Morris. And this went on for about a year and a half. And then, in 1992, when the Rebbe had the stroke, so I remember I came home then for Pesach, which was just a few weeks later, and we had a class, and Morris took me home, and he said to me that he was very, very despondent about what had happened to the Rebbe. And he said to me, if that's what happens to tzaddikim, what will happen to me? And he said to me, I don't want to do mitzvahs anymore. I'm afraid of God. I mean, it makes me. I want out. I want out. And I'm like, Morris, what are you talking about? You've made such beautiful strides in your Yiddishkeit. There's nothing to do. He was adamant. I'm out. I'm out. He's angry at God. Doesn't want to put on tefillin anymore. Okay, so what should I do? You know, I'm a kid. I'm 21 years old. Bottom line, I continued to talk to him, and over Pesach I met with him a few times, and I finally convinced him that it was foolish to be angry at God, and Morris started to put on tefillin again. I'm going to fast forward the story to I came back from Los Angeles in September of 1992, and I resumed teaching this class, and I continued to teach the class, and then afterwards, I was away in Argentina, and somebody else took over for me, and I came back, and I continued to teach. I ended up going to Russia for a couple of months. Somebody took over for me. And then, of course, the Rebbe fell ill again. There was a second stroke on the very same day, 2 years later, in 1994. And I seem to remember, at that time, I studied, I moved my yeshiva to the hospital, where I remained in the chapel with a small group of students. And I think I would still meet with this group, and I would teach them Torah every week. And then Gimel Tammuz came, and it was an awful, very traumatic time for all of us Hasidim. And I remember a conversation I had with Morris during the Rebbe Shiva. And he said to me, you can't go into a depression and get sad. He said, you have to, the Jewish people need rabbis and leaders, and you have to be upbeat, and the Rebbe wanted you to be upbeat, and you can't be despondent. And he was giving me this whole pep talk. At the end of the Shiva, I didn't really know what my next move would be. Nobody had planned this. This didn't fit into what we imagined the future was going to look like. And I had more or less finished my studies. I was just about finished ordination. I didn't really know where to go from here. I didn't know what to do next. And I got this offer to go out to Milwaukee, to be in the Lubavitch house there and to teach an adult education program. So without knowing what else to do, I kind of said, okay, sounds like a reasonable thing to do. And I had this conversation with Morris 2 days after the Rebbe Shiva, and he said to me, I thought about it. I'm done. He said, I'm done. I'm finished. I'm never putting on tefillin again. I don't even know if I'm keeping kosher anymore. I am done. And he's like, I'm out. And I reasoned with him and talked to him. Nothing doing. I'm done. Okay. That was the end of the conversation. He hung up the phone. And I was sad to begin with. This made me even sadder. And the next day, I headed out to the airport. The flight was a flight from Newark Airport, and it was the first time I went to the Ohel. Obviously, I was there on the day of Gimel Tammuz, but I hadn't been to the Ohel yet. This was just about 10 days after Gimel Tammuz. Everything was still fresh. The grave was still fresh. There was no, you go to the Ohel, there's a home, a place to write. There was nothing. There was nothing. My brother Yossi was driving me to the airport, and I remember taking paper from my parents' house, and I wrote my prayer note on the back of the trunk. I had a stack of paper, and I was writing on the stack of paper on the back of the trunk, and I was going to go into the Ohel, and from there go to the airport. I still remember writing this letter on the back of the trunk. And one of the things that I asked the Rebbe to pray for me, to bless me with, I remember I asked the bracha that I should be able to influence the people that I'm supposed to influence. And when I wrote these words, I was thinking of Maris Schumacher. I wasn't a rabbi at the time. I didn't have a congregation. I was thinking of Maris Schumacher. When I wrote these words, I asked a bracha that I should influence the people I'm supposed to influence. And I wrote these words, I was thinking about Maris Schumacher. And I went into the Ohel, and whatever, I did what I did at the Ohel. And we drove to the airport. And I remember I hadn't smiled in weeks. I was really depressed. And I remember sitting down on the plane, and there was a young man sitting next to me, a teenager, maybe 15, 16 years old. And I said, "Would you like to put on tefillin?" It was summer, the sun hadn't gone down yet. And he said, Nah, I'm not really interested. And I thought to myself, how do I get this guy to put on tefillin? So, I have a bit of an artistic talent. So I took a napkin, and I started to draw a picture on the back of a napkin. And this guy's looking over my shoulder. He's looking next door. He says, "That's like unbelievable." He says, "How'd you do that?" I said, "I don't know. It's the thing I do." And I take another napkin. I draw another face. I said, "You want this picture?" He says, "Yeah, it's so cool." I said, "Put on film and give you the picture." So he said, "You really?" He says, "You make me more pictures? I'll make as many pictures as you want. I'll draw as many pictures. If you put on film, I'll draw you pictures." And so I drew him a bunch of pictures on the back of a napkin. And he put on film, and I actually remember this very clearly because it was the first time that I had a little joy after Gimel Tammuz. It was actually the first time I smiled after Gimel Tammuz. I smile a lot. I'm a smiley guy, but these muscles didn't work for a long time. They were. Anyway, and I come to Milwaukee, and I started to teach, and it was really mostly one-on-one learning. Several days after I arrive, I get a phone call. In the Lubavitch House office, I'm being paged. Somebody is looking for you. That's kind of strange. Nobody really knows me to look for me yet. And they get on the phone, and it's Morris. And he says, "Where the blankety blank are you?" I'm like, "You know where I am. You just called this number." He says, "I'm looking for you for 3 days." I'm like, "Sorry, I didn't know I have to check in with you." What is it, Morris? And he says, "Listen, you remember we had that conversation? I told you I'm done with the tefillin." I said, "Yeah, I do. I'm not happy about it." I said, "I really think you're making a mistake." He said, "Well," and this had been 3 days earlier, I was at the Ohel at about maybe 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. And I had gone into the Ohel somewhere between 4:30 and 5. He says, "I just want you to know that on this day," and he tells me the day I left, and approximately exactly the time I was at the Ohel, he tells me, I suddenly began to feel really uncomfortable about my decision. And I said, "You know what?" The more I thought about it, I said, "This is wrong. This is wrong," he said. So I left the store. I closed the store at 5 o'clock, he said. I went home, and I put on tefillin, and I prayed the mincha. And he said, "I'm looking for you for 3 days, I wanted to tell you. For 3 days, I wanted to tell you that I'm putting on tefillin again. And that I'm at peace with God again." And I still hear from Morris on a very, very rare occasion. I know he's one of my friends on Facebook. Maybe he's even watching. But the amazing thing to me was that it was exactly Morris I thought of at the exact time I had been at the Ohel when I wrote those words. I should be able to influence those who I'm supposed to influence. Exactly at that time, there was what we call Yera Olav Ruach Mimorim, like a spirit, a stirring from a higher place, somehow elevated him and changed him, and he hasn't looked back since. And for me, it's always been a meaningful story. It's a meaningful story on so many levels, but besides everything else, we learned today in the Torah portion, those of you, this tiny crowd that was upstairs with me, as we're allowed to, when I spoke about the notion of Yosef remaining with the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, and the notion of tzaddikim living on, continuing to live and to function in this world, that this is really the story of the Rebbe. It's the story of Shlichus. It's the story of our lives. It's the story of Chabad Flamingo and so many other communities around the world. So l'chaim, everybody. Thank you for your kind wishes, your good wishes. I used to tell people, when I grow up, I hope I'll be a good rabbi when I grow up. That was my way out, but I guess that's over. I think at this point, I think at 50, I'm kind of grown up. So,
mission accomplished.
Oh,
You're a great rabbi.
All I can say is that I'm going to keep trying. I'll keep trying to be a good rabbi. I'll keep trying to be as good as I can be, and hopefully the Rebbe will continue to bless me, that I should be able to influence people in a positive way, to uplift other Yidden, because that's really what life's all about, and to be able to make a difference, to make a positive difference. And each mitzvah is a big deal, because each mitzvah brings the coming of Mashiach a little bit closer, and we can't get together this year. We can't really farbreng. We don't have the opportunities that we've become accustomed to, rightfully so. But now we're in this weird COVID situation. So Baruch Hashem, we have technology. We have the opportunity to get together, at least in a virtual way. And I guess the Zoombrengen is a Zoombrengen. There's something to it. I know there's many people are watching on Facebook, and I'm seeing all of you here on Zoom. Hey guys, can you get me a l'chaim? Give me just a second. I'm going to go grab a l'chaim. We'll say l'chaim together. Just one sec.
Steve, I don't see you getting a l'chaim. You know?
All right, I should have planned this a little better, okay? I should have had a l'chaim ready, but I didn't really know how this was going to go, so... L'chaim, I made a bracha on the wine earlier. That takes care of mashkin, so I don't have to make another bracha. Shahako. L'chaim, l'chaim, to each and every one of you, to all the members of our community that are joining on Zoom. I just want to say that you're the best community any rabbi ever could have asked for, and I love all of you. I'm grateful for your support and your friendship. It means a lot to me, and if sometimes I'm not as good as I should be, so we'll all try to be a little better, and together, hopefully, we'll make not only a little difference, but a world of difference. Together with all of you, our hope and our prayer is that the shlichus that Rebbe gave us should finally reach fruition. And that was the shlichus that Rebbe gave us is lahavi l'meisa Mashiach, that we should put an end to the galut, and that we should, Emertz Hashem, together be reunited with all of Am Yisrael from all over the world, and from all times, with the coming of Mashiach b'mheira will be Amen. Amen. L'chaim, everybody. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim.